we're going to move into the final segment of our discussion, the shape of tomorrow's wealth and asset managers. What is the industry going to look like? And Amin, if I can start with you again, you've done a lot of research around these topics with pension schemes, asset managers and wealth managers. What do you feel that these institutions will look like in the future? Will they be slimmed down? Do you see more use of technology with computerized asset allocation models and use of ETFs? Are the high-tech tools now available to totally demystify portfolio construction, asset allocation and stock selection?
Yeah, I think we will see a variety of business models. So at the most general level, the research that we've done sort of shows that irrespective of which business model you use, the most important critical success factor is really going to be proximity to clients. Because investing now, I think Jan put it very eloquently, that we've got people conditioned to thinking about returns, now we've got to condition them to think about risks. And that's only going to come as a result of learning by doing in the marketplace, as well as learning by doing through encounters with asset managers. So any organization, no matter what its business model is, if it puts client interest first, it stands a much better chance of success than any other kind of business models. Having said that, our work also suggests that we're likely to see quite a lot of fragmentation in the industry. First, digitization is going to have a major impact, particularly at the commoditized end. We're seeing vast cohort of post-war baby boomers retiring now. Their planned balances are not significant enough for them to rely on expensive advice. So they're going to rely on DIY options. And we're going to see a marriage made in heaven between technology and ETFs. It's already happening in the States. It's happening here in Europe and so on. So digitization is going to be a major factor in terms of bringing about fragmentations in different business models. And more and more asset managers are now beginning to sort of realize that as well as thinking about having skilled managers and so on, they also really need to think about implementation issues. I think it was you, Bill, who mentioned that 80% of returns came from asset allocation. Now, that was the case in the past also with institutional investors. A study that we published last year showed that figure has dropped to 50%. And the other 50% comes through implementation expertise. And implementation in institutional space basically means how good is the governance structure, how nimble it is a governance structure. So any houses, asset management houses who are really good at implementation, they're really likely to do well. My final point is really about asset managers who are able to manage client expectations about relative returns and absolute returns. What we've seen is huge client interest in uncorrelated absolute returns. So absolute return strategies have grown. But as you know and I know, absolute return strategies tend to underperform in an up market. And in the up market, clients want relative returns, despite the fact that they've signed up for absolute return mandates. And I think this is where client education really needs to be improved quite a lot, because we are seeing a lot of unnecessary tension between managers and their clients, in that clients basically want absolute returns in the down market and they want relative returns in up market, and they can't really have the cake, eat it and see it grow at the same time. There is a big educational task to be done. So successful business models will really put emphasis on some or most of those things.
I'd like to bring in Didier. If we use the motor vehicle analogy, so beloved of many private bankers and asset managers, will we see an increased move towards self-drive vehicles, maybe with many more sensors on them, allowing them to sense danger, to know when to leave the traffic and to park the car without accident?
Yeah, I like the analogy of the self-driving car, but we know that the problem with the self-driving car is who is responsible in case of an accident. So there will always be somebody responsible in case of an accident, and it is also, the analogy is also valid for the asset management world. Your client will hold you responsible anytime, even if you use an artificial intelligence to produce the things. And that's probably one of the challenge of the total automation of the system with ETF. With there might be a lot of, let's say, litigation risk coming because of this. So it's
just say very quickly there that these new digitization tools that are being introduced, they really are very good. They're backed by advice engine. to the extent that individuals know exactly what is it that they're doing in very simplified terms. So they're given ideas about what asset allocation is, what portfolio construction is, what you need to do at each stage and so on. Of course, at the end of the day, somebody is really going to take the risk. At the moment, we've got a situation where individuals are really left to make those decisions, either on their own device or use very expensive advice.
And there's a great opportunity for the Swiss banks here, Daniel, which have been in the news for all the wrong reasons, to really develop their portfolio management expertise.
I think it is a big chance, and the tradition of Swiss bank is being close to the clients and try to understand our client needs and properly understanding what the client needs, and that's not an easy thing in itself. Understanding his targets, understanding his risk. And there are two different notions about risk. So we're having the risk capacity, so how much risk he can hold, and we're coming back to like being stopped out of a strategy and exiting a strategy, but also his risk willingness is not the same. So they need to be balanced, and we need to address both of the elements. So there's the entire client part around it. So understanding the client and managing and communicating what he's getting. That's the first function the private bank or wealth managers will have. And the second one is concentrating on the allocation. I think the allocation is a part wealth managers still need to have a hold on in order to understand how to structure the portfolios. And we have talked about the different concepts about beta, traditional and non-traditional ones, about alpha, to what extent you want to be active or passive. I think that's the core task of a wealth manager, these two levels. On the back end, there is probably a further industrialization of like how these building blocks are being produced. If having the right concepts, we can address that.
If I may, you mentioned active versus passive. One of the challenges moving forward, it's not consensual, but it's a firm conviction for me, is that we've got to be able to think beyond active versus passive. It's a considerable source of confusion. In my view, smart beta, beta alpha, those are a producer's view. The distinction is a producer's view. If you take the total risk standpoint or the client views or the portfolio view, they are all in the same boat in the sense that they all incorporate some factors. Actually, and at the end of the day, as CIOs, we are responsible for this exposure to the various factors. It is simply nonsense to present cap-weighted benchmark exposure as a risk-neutral type of thing. It's politically easy to sell to the governance, but it's flawed, basically. So, in my view, everything is active, actually, and passive is just a mode of implementation, and this is a critical thing.
Excellent. And what are the 2 or 3 really big do's and don'ts in our quest to build a new model for managing portfolios of wealthy clients?
I think the main do, and I think we all agree on that, is that if you have to involve the client right from the beginning. If you don't involve the client, you're basically introducing enormous agency risks going forward. Secondly, I think being more innovative in terms of what we're doing on every level of the implementation, as I mentioned, starting from which are the building blocks, how do you construct portfolios, and how do you manage risk. And I think what we should try to avoid is to basically assume that what we've done in the past is going to work in the future, stick to models and stick to, concepts can be very good, but models assumed to be the panacea for all the problems like modern portfolio theory. That's a very dangerous starting point.
I would insist on 2 things that are connecting with the management of the business. One is to have to learn from the errors, because that's something this industry has a lot of difficulties. We are simply reproducing a lot of errors that we have done or fathers have done in the past. So that's something extremely important. The second thing is it's more than creating client proximity. It's about having a feedback loop between the client and the asset manager. And it's not an easy one because you have a lot of people in the middle.
Actually, we've got to move for sure. One aspect I would mention is the way we are organized, actually. To a large extent, the way you are organized reflects the way you are thinking. and the opposite is true. You think often the way you are organized. We are all talking about risk factors, etc., but we are still organized across asset classes, passive versus active, those kind of things. This is one thing. Two, we've got to understand. So to get a better understanding means that we've got to invest more in understanding, and to accept failure as part of the game. There is no size-fits-all solution across the investment space. Success in our space is a function of failure, and this is a managerial and an investment issue.
Thank you. Amin.
My do is that we really need to change investor mindsets here. And we need to change investment mindsets in two respects. One of them is that we need to really rewrite the promise of investing. We need to bring risk firmly back into the equation and really talk about risk and returns rather than just parade a menu of returns and simply give standard deviations of returns. We need to move away from that. So rewrite the promise in order to manage people's expectation. My second point under changing mindsets is really to create a new currency around the existing terminology of diversification and liquidity and correlation and so on. What we have is we've got all concepts from modern portfolio theory being applied into a completely new situation. So we need to really create a new currency around these concepts. So these are mindset issues which are part of the do's. Part of the don'ts is simply to accept the fact that you cannot really rely on theories or black boxes. Investing has always been an art. And if anything, it's more an art now than in the past, largely because markets are now driven by politics rather than economics. So we need to really rethink about how we do investing, and certainly get away from the old dogmas or old theories, which if they ever worked, they worked in distant past. They're not likely to work in the kind of environment where central bank action and the other big mega drivers like demographics, they are really driving the markets. Let's really begin to learn to take those into account.
Well, thank you very much for a fascinating discussion. Just to summarise, we've looked at how the demise of modern portfolio theory has particularly been affected by the environment, how this will actually change the structure of asset management groups, how it will lead to organisational change, including distribution and the changing nature of the distributor. We've looked at how these changes will affect asset management techniques also in terms of asset allocation in particular. And most of all, I think the message that is coming home is that the new structures and ways of looking at assets have to really focus around the client and the needs of the client. So thanks again for an absolutely fascinating discussion.